Yesterday's lecture is on Aristotle Poetics. Okay, I have taught you how you have to do criticism already. Any subject, any content, how you have to do a literary criticism, I have taught you already. So now, without wasting time, we are moving much into our syllabus. So before going into that, I just wanted to highlight the origin of criticism. Okay, origin of criticism. So it is that I want you to make notes. Yes, the word criticism is from a Greek term called critics, called the judge, which is the meaning of the word kritis means judge. So as I already told you, in the act of criticism, we don't only understand and interpret a text, but also we pass a judgment. Okay, with what? With what evidences we pass a judgment? Scientific evidences has to be proved in order to prove your judgments. So yes, the word criticism is derived from the Greek term called kritis, K-R-I-T-E-S, kritis. The meaning of the word kritis means judge. Yes. Okay, so who can be the first critic ever? Have you wondered who can be the first critic? See, you write a poem, and you people write a poem, I know. You write a poem, you write any work, any statement. Before you pass it down to criticism to other people, what will you do? You read and see whether it is correct. Do you have a spelling mistake? Is it what that you wanted to convey? Isn't it not? So what happens? The creator, whoever is writing the content itself, becomes the first critic. Okay, so this first critic, the creator, how will he criticize his work? He will be criticizing based on the self-assessment. It's there. Based on the self-assessment, reflection, and finally on the judgment whether what he wanted to produce, has he produced or not. Yes? So in that way, the creative act itself is a critical act, is what we see. The creative act itself is a critical act. So rather than creating a work and submitting for other people to criticize, the creator itself first criticizes based on three things. First one is self-assessment, reflection, and judgment. Yes. Now, okay. From when did this criticism happen? Have any idea about it? I told you, criticism happened with the creative act itself, isn't it not? So the first writer, or the first creator would have been the first critic, isn't it not? So this idea of criticism slowly spread only 800 years before Jesus Christ itself. 800 approximately. This is not the actuality, but it's just the approximately. Approximately 800 years before Christ. Okay, so 800 years before Christ was an era of epic poets. Was an era of epic poets. So because we know that all this criticism evolved in the Greek language, so we are starting from Greek literature itself. So an era of epic poet, namely poet like Homer and Hesiod. Okay, Hesiod. Then you had this lyrical poets. These are the names to be mentioned in lyrical poets: Archilochus, Ibycus, Alcaeus, and Sappho. All these are lyrical poets. Okay. Then 800 before Christ. Now slowly we are coming down to 5 to 500 BC, and this period from 500 BC is called as the classical period. Okay, it's called as the classical period, and it was during this classical period you had great dramatists like Euripides, Aeschylus, and Sophocles. Okay, and then you had the great philosophers of that time. It was Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So we had a discussion in class. Who was whose student? So it was Socrates who started first, okay, and Plato became Socrates' student, and Aristotle becomes Plato's student. So these are all I'm just dealing, trying to trace how criticism slowly began. Okay, okay. Now that we are into classical period and our topic is only related with the classical period of Aristotle's work called Poetics, I'm not moving further into the other periods. Okay, so I'm just sticking with Aristotle. I'm trying to explain with Aristotle. And one thing of Aristotle is a tutor. He became the tutor of Alexander the Great. So now we are going to go into the biography of Aristotle. Our Aristotle was born in a place called Satyria in Macedonia. Born in Satygra, okay, in Macedonia, which is there in Greece, in 384 BC. Okay, he was a member of Plato's Academy. He was a member of Plato's Academy when he was 18 years old. He became a member of Plato's Academy at 18 years old. And after the death of Plato, King Philip at that time made Aristotle to be the tutor to Alexander. King Philip made Aristotle the tutor to Alexander when Alexander was just 14 years old. And Alexander was just 14 years old. Aristotle was deeply moved and subjected to Plato's philosophy, but then after the death of Plato, he slowly developed his own philosophy. Okay, Aristotle founded a school, his own school. You just note down. Aristotle founded his own school. The name of the school is called Lyceum. 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 And many disciples, and he trained many disciples. His school dealt with the study of politics. His school dealt with the study of politics, literature, history, natural science, and biology. I repeat, politics, literature, history, natural science, and biology. About his personal life, Aristotle married his wife named Pythias, Pythias. Pythias. But then, all intellectual people cannot have a happy married life, and Aristotle was also one such. The name of the wife is Pythias, Pythias. Pythias. And not moving more into Aristotle's personal life, we are getting into Aristotle's poetics. Before going into poetics, we are just and he died in the year. He had before going to the death, I'll just mention this. To Aristotle, he held virtues. To him, virtues and morals he treated as very supreme. He treated virtues and morals very supreme. Okay, and his other famous work other than poetic is dialogues on monarchy, dialogues on monarchy, rhetoric, and metaphysics. Okay, and the last work comes to be poetics, which is supposed to be incomplete. We have only 26 chapters of poetics with us. So in this poetics, he deals with the art of writing poetry. He deals with the art of writing poetry, which he also included drama in it. In which he also included drama in it. Okay. Yes, and he died in Euboea in 322 BC. He died in Euboea in 322 BC. Okay, and since we saw that Aristotle has started his own school, and what is the name of the school? Lyceum. Okay, yes. What is that he did in the school? Despite of all this, his concepts of ethics, because he dealt virtue and moral supreme, right? So what is his basic concept of life ethic? Okay, so he says that means versus goals. You have to have a goal. Only if you have a goal, you will find means to achieve that goal. Okay, simple. To substantiate with a proverb, where there is a will, there is a way. So that is what he also followed. Where there is a goal, you will find all means to achieve the goal. Okay, so that is what this idea. See, we pursue the goals we have because they are desirable. Okay, and the means are the ways by which we achieve the goal. You wanted to become rich. How do you want to become rich? You have all opportunities to steal. Okay, to dwell into not a virtuous uh, means, and you can become rich. But that is not our motto. Our motto is to follow virtue and become rich. How? Through education, through a proper employment. Okay, so what is there? Our goal is to become rich. So we are finding education as a means to achieve our goal. That is his ethic. And sometimes goals become means to other things. We want to get something, we can get something else. So the one ultimate goal that we want to achieve, not for something else, but for the goal itself. Okay, and the ultimate goal, he says, ends or lies in happiness of an individual. Why do you want to get rich? You wanted to be happy. What makes you happy? Whatever you see in the shop, you wanted to buy, for which you wanted money. For which you wanted money, you want a good employment which pays you. Or you become an entrepreneur, you do a business, for which you need to enhance your managerial skills. So one goal, desired goal, and all that you do it is the means. That is his ethics of life, Aristotle ethics of life. And he says that man is a sociable by nature. He's very social. He cannot live an secluded life. Yes or no? How many of you like to be lonely? You like to be lonely, or you like to be in solitude? We always like to be in solitude, but that solitude, if it prolongs to an extended time, it becomes loneliness. And you want somebody else to talk. Appa, have you come? All these time I was sitting all alone. Yes. So what he says, man is a very sociable by nature. Man can better attain happiness by having only friendship. Okay, friendship not with the people but with the government. Yes, so the best form of government, he says, a limited democracy, not monarchy, not aristocracy or a full democracy, but a limited democracy is few. Okay, so this is what we learn about Aristotle's concept of creating a school called Lyceum. This is how he wanted a modeled society to be so. Okay, now moving into our poetics. Okay, so he says, according to Aristotle, imitation is the basic virtue of fine arts. What is the basic virtue? Yes, please make a note of it. Imitation is the basic virtue of all fine arts. Yes, and he calls that imitation itself as mimesis. He calls imitation as mimesis. What all falls into fine arts? Tell me. Is it just poetry? Is it just drama? What other things falls into fine arts? You have categories like music, paint, dance, sculpture, tragedy, comedy, all these things fall into fine arts. Okay, so he says not only literature, but all these fine arts are only imitations. Are only imitations. So he then further divided this concept of imitation under three heads: medium, object, and manner. Okay, concept of imitation. He says that he categorizes under how many heads? Three heads. What are the three heads? Medium, object, and manner. Yes. Okay, now listen, and you have to just listen to me and make a note. What is medium? All color, form, and sounds. Okay, all color, form, and sounds are constitutes medium. What are the three things that constitutes medium? Color, form, and sounds constitutes a medium. Okay, yes. And the sound, he again categorizes the sound into three heads: rhythm, language, and harmony. Sound, there are three main concept of imitation. What are the three main concepts of imitation? Medium, object, and manner. Now we are going to deal only with medium. Okay, so in that medium, he says all colors. A painter can express it, his feeling through colors. Yes, so a poet can express his feelings through form. Okay, and sounds. A musician can express his feeling through sounds. So all these three constitutes what? Medium. Color, form, and sound. And the sound he further classifies into three heads: rhythm, language, and harmony. He classifies into three heads: rhythm, language, and harmony. Yes. And the form, sorry, object. Okay, now we are moving to, now we have done with medium. Now we are moving to object. Yes. So what is the object? Object of imitation in fine arts are nothing but actions of men. Are nothing but actions of men. I have first explain these things and then I'll go in detail. Okay. So, yes. So the objects of imitation is the actions of men, either good or bad. So he says all good things, okay, can be expressed, and all follies of human beings can also be expressed, and these constitutes object. Okay. And he says that tragedy alone idealizes man. Which idealizes man? Tragedy makes or elevates man to supreme. Tragedy idealizes a man, whereas comedy exposes man's follies. Comedy exposes man's follies. So all good actions, he says, are virtues, and all unvirtuous action he calls it as comedy. This is the object of imitation. Then moving on to the manner. Manner of imitation. You have three manner of imitation. First, he calls it as narrative mode. Three modes in manner. First, he calls it as narrative mode. Second, he calls it as dramatic mode. First is narrative mode. Second is dramatic mode. And the third, he calls it as synthesizing the two modes, that is narrative and dramatic modes. What is a narrative mode? Any poetry or a drama that narrates the incident is called as a narrative mode. And what is a dramatic mode? That describes the action of the person or the hero, okay, like their love, warfare, all these comes into your dramatic mode. And finally, a combination of these two can also be represented. These are the three major modes in which manner deals with. Okay, so he says that what are fine arts? What is a basic virtue of fine arts? What is the basic virtue of fine arts? Imitation is the basic virtue of fine arts. I started with that, isn't it? See? And all imitation, he calls it as mimesis. And this concept of imitation falls under how many headings? Medium, object and manner. And in medium we have color, form and sound. And sound is again categorized into rhythm, language and harmony. Okay, then moving on to object. Actions of men are the object. So good actions constitute the virtues, and all unvirtue actions he calls it as follies of human being. And he also says that tragedy only idealizes man when compared to comedy, because comedy only focuses on the follies of a man. Then we see the manner. In the manner we see three modes. One is narrative mode, second one is dramatic mode, and third one is a synthesis of these two modes. Okay, so that is what he says. Something beautiful is orderly and organized. What is beautiful in this work is orderly and organized is because it is an imitation. And because it is imitation, now is the important point. Because it is imitation, it is not just a mimicry or a copy. Because it is imitation, it is not what? It is not a mimicry or it is a copy, but it is an actualization. Okay, it is a mimicry or copy, but it is a real creative endeavor. What is a real creative endeavor? This imitation is a real creative endeavor. Okay, and finally we see that a work of art. Why do we need a work of art? Because a work of art should be soothing, cleansing or exhalating to the emotions. It should address your emotion. It should address your emotion, because we imitate from nature. It is not mimicry. He calls it as real creative endeavor. Okay, and why do we need such real creative endeavor? Because we need such real creative endeavor to soothen our emotions, to cleanse our emotions, and or exhalating to the emotions, or giving a feel of high to our emotions. Is it clear for you? Yes. Then see Aristotle's theory of imitation. Mimesis is manifested in particulars which resemble or imitate the forms from which they are derived. Forms from which they are derived. Okay. For example, when you draw a tree, for example, you're drawing. Okay. Tell me what all colors you use, because we dealt with colors in the medium. Isn't it not? What colors you use? Definitely a green color is there. Why? Because we imitate from the nature, but our drawing cannot be the exact of the nature. Isn't it not? We see, we copy from the nature, but it is not the exact. So that is what is the line here, which resemble or imitate the forms from which they are derived. We cannot draw a tree like a building and call it as a tree. And we cannot draw a tree and call it as a building. So whatever form that it is in, we derive from it. That is mimesis, that is imitation. So thus the mimetic world, the world of representation. You have mimetic world. What is this mimetic world? It is a world of representation, because you see and you represent. You see and you represent. Nowadays technologies have developed. You have this mobile phones. Wherever you go, you have a click. But there it is not possible. If one person had an opportunity to go abroad, how will he explain? Maybe if he had the talent of drawing, definitely out of drawing. Okay, so these are the concepts of imitation in the medium that we saw. So thus the mimetic world is a world of representation, is inferior for it consists of imitations which will always be subordinate to their original. So what is he trying to say? Though we are imitating from the original, it cannot overpower it. It can always remain inferior to the original. Is it clear? Because we are doing only the imitation, and these representation he calls it as mimetic world. You understanding? Yes. So the mimetic activity. What is mimetic activity? Just imitation. Okay, mimetic activity produces appearances and illusions that affect the perception and behavior of people, and this is already given in his work called The Republic. Okay. Again he's going on. See, mimesis is a natural human inclination described as inherent in a man from his earliest days. We tend to copy others. Okay, maybe their style of walking or the way they speak. In a way, it is into us because we are designed like that. That is what is mimetic, because imitation is part and parcel of a man, Aristotle says. So the fundamental expression of human experience within the world, a means of learning about nature that through the perpetual experience allows us to get closer to the real. What is the ultimate focus of imitation? We are trying to imitate because we would like to reproduce a mimetic world close to the reality. Isn't it not? So even in poetry, when you're happy, you write a happy poetry, or when you're sad, you write a very sad poetry. But then the emotions that you have is not totally conveyed into your poem, because it is only close to the reality and not the exact reality. That is why he calls it as a mimetic world, a world of representation to the reality. Am I making it clear for you? Is it easy for you? Okay. So mimesis not only functions to recreate existing objects or them, it not really recreates. Okay, and mimesis creates a fictional world of representation in which there is no capacity for a non-mediated relationship to reality. Though it is a fictional world, it is drawn out of a real world, and we are all this representation, mimetic, is a growth towards the reality. Following? Imitation. That is not real. It is close to reality. And art imitates not the mere show of things, but the ideal reality embodied in very object of the world. Okay. If I want to explain this statement well, I would like to quote any kind of pain or tragedy, or a character called Job. Okay. He suffers. So the concept of world is a righteous man will never suffer. But Job proves to be a very righteous man, but he suffers. So what Aristotle here in imitation tries to say is, it tries to embody in the very object of the world that there is no concrete rule like that. That a righteous man doesn't need to suffer. He has every right to suffer, but it is a collective conscious understanding that a righteous will not suffer. Okay, but even if he is under suffering, that is also acceptable. Is it clear? So art imitates not mere shows of things, not only shows of things, not only that is good, but also the pains, an ideal. So that is why he already has mentioned that tragedy only idealizes man, and comedy brings out the follies of man. Okay, all pains and sufferings, we call it as tragedy. Maybe because a man is outpowering his destiny or his fate, and he still survives to be. Clear? The process of nature is a creative process. Which is a creative process? Nature. What do you do? Because we imitate, right? Mimetic world. It is a nature And as already we have mentioned, it is not mimicry. Imitation, mimesis is not mimicry or copying, but a real creative endeavor. That is what here again he mentions. A creative process everywhere in nature. As the same example, from a tree, we only tend to give green color to the leaves. Okay, we don't give any other color because that's nature we are trying to imitate, but it is not real. Trying to focus to be on the real. Okay, yes. Everywhere in nature there is a ceaseless and upward progress. This is beautiful. I really liked it. So in nature, whatever pains, whatever struggles, whatever natural calamities happen, nature accepts and it only moves forward. There is no downward growth. That is what Aristotle has observed from nature. Okay, so there is only upward progress in everything, and the poet imitates this upward movement of nature even in his poetry. So from nature he wants man to learn, imitate it in life. When the nature can take up all ills and gains that nature is throwing to it, and it again goes on upward movement. So a poet should also imitate such upward movement in the life and in expression of emotions in their poetry also. Is it clear? Yes. So art reproduces the original not as it is, but as it appears to the senses. We are not copying, but we are recreating, but not the real one. Close to the real one. Hope I'm very clear to you. Not confusing, right? So we are copying from the nature. Okay, this copying, he says that we take everything into our mind and we are trying to reproduce it. So this is not copying. This is also a kind of recreating activity. And this recreated activity, which we call it as poetry, is not original to the emotions, but it is very close to the emotions. Clear? Understanding something? Okay. Art produces the external according to the idea or image in his mind. Okay, see the same example when I wanted to give you. Why do you want to draw a tree? Because in your mind you wanted to draw a tree. It may differ person to person. So what only your mind wanted, it will draw from the nature. Others, it will not draw. Even if it is there obvious, your mind will not see. That is what he says. Art produces the external according to the idea or the image in the mind. What your mind wanted only that you will try to. Same thing, it is applicable for our day-to-day activity also. One example, because you feel like sleepy, I just come out of Aristotle and tell you. The way you dress up. For example, you have an occasion, you have a farewell here. Okay, what will you do first? Everything happens in the mind. Okay, this color, this sari, this is how, this is my outfit, this is going to be my accessory. And then you find it for that. So same thing is implied here. Okay, so because it is there in the mind of the poet what it has to be expressed, he draws from the nature and imitates it in the poetry. Clear? So thus the poet does not copy the external word but creates according to his idea of it. Okay, before moving into the difference between poetry and history, I think I just highlight what Aristotle talks about poetry. Only 4 points and then I wind up my class. So according to Aristotle, here Aristotle deals only with dramatic poetry. What poetry? What other poets we saw? What other poetry we saw during 800 years before Jesus Christ? Epic poetry. Then we saw lyrical poetry. Now Aristotle is dealing with dramatic poetry. Yes. So in this, he says that poetry takes origin from 4 factors. Aristotle's view of poetry, he says poetry takes its origin from 4 factors. Okay, from 4 factors. First factor is imitation. First factor is imitation. He says that man imitates nature as how a child imitates its parents. Man imitates nature as how a child imitates its parents. And he says imitation is happening because man derives pleasure out of imitation. Second point is imitation gives pleasure. Third point, third origin for poetry, he says through imitation man learns and that learning gives him pleasure. Through imitation a man learns and that learning gives him pleasure. And imitation also helps him to achieve harmony. Imitation also helps him to achieve harmony. So according to Aristotle, these are the four factors why a poetry is written. Okay. So a quick throwback of today's class. So we saw that the word criticism came from a Greek term called critics, which means to judge, and the very first critic is none but the creator itself. So the very creative act itself is a critical act. Okay, and the critical act is done on three bases: self-assessment, reflection, and judgment. Yes. So when did this criticism happen? As we see, this type of criticism started 800 years before Christ, and that era was called an era of epic poets, where you had poets like Homer and Hesiod and lyrical poets. Then we move on to the classical period, starts from 500 BC. You have this great dramatists like Euripides and Sophocles, and now we come down to our author who falls into this classical period, and one of the greatest philosophers of that time, who was a grand student of Socrates. Socrates' student was Plato, and Plato's student is Aristotle. Okay, on knowing Aristotle's biography, okay, and his concepts on ethics and politics, we slowly went to poetics, and we saw how poetry is an imitation, and that imitation he calls it as mimesis. And this concept of imitation is based on medium, object, and manner. And this medium you have color, form, and sound, and that sound you have what? Language, rhythm, language, and harmony. Okay, then moving on to the object, we saw you had objects are just actions of men, all good, virtuous actions, and unvirtuous actions. And tragedy only idealizes man, and comedy exposes the folly. Okay, then moving on to the manner, we saw you had three manners. One is narrative mode, second one is dramatic mode, and third one is the synthesis of these two modes is what manner constitutes of. Okay, and then we saw how it has mimesis, in depth, why mimesis has to happen, how it happens. Okay, and what is the only purpose of mimesis. Finally we understand, though we copy, mimesis is that though it is a representative world, it is not the real world, it is only close to the reality. Okay, and that is the concept of mimesis. And finally I ended this session by telling you that Aristotle's understanding of the four origins of poetry. That first origin is imitation, as how man imitates nature, as how child imitates its father. Second, he imitates because he thinks he gets pleasure. Third one, he imitates because imitation gives him learning, and then learning gives him pleasure, and then he finds imitation to give him harmony. Okay, with that note, I'm stopping. Thank you. Something I hope you understand. Yes, ma'am.